The BMW XM is the biggest performance car failure of the 2020s. Now, objectively, if you take price out of the picture, the XM should be a popular vehicle. It's the new flagship model for a legendary performance automaker in BMW. It's also a brand new product in the red-hot high-performance SUV segment. And it's no slouch either, making around 740 horsepower in its top-level trim. But the amount of hate that the BMW XM has been getting online is like nothing I have ever seen before. Every single comment section of a post that features this car is just filled with people bashing it. And you might be thinking that's just people online and they don't even have the money to buy one in the first place. But it seems that the people that actually are in the market for this type of vehicle aren't big fans of it either. It's pretty common to see dealerships offering up to $15,000 off MSRP and even more in lease incentives. And that's despite the fact that most cars in this segment are still selling for MSRP, and some special models like the XM are still even going a little bit above sticker. So today we are going to take a deep dive into the BMW XM. We're going to talk about why BMW thought it was a good idea to produce this car in the first place, what ultimately led to its downfall, and how I think history will look back on the BMW XM. So for a little bit of context as to why BMW decided to produce this model, I think it's helpful to look back at their history. You almost have to feel bad for BMW a little bit that every time they come out with a new halo flagship model, it's at best met with a lukewarm reception and at worst is a total flop. Their last attempt to break into the upper echelons of the car market was with the i8. This was a car that was meant to be breaking ground for the next generation of hybrid supercars, and while the styling certainly caught people's attention, it was never really embraced by the enthusiast community. And that's because this car was pretty underpowered, and I think BMW was trying to push the idea of a performance hybrid powertrain maybe just a little bit too early. Before the i8, BMW's last flagship was the Z8, which had retro styling and a big V8 engine. This car did have some pretty serious performance capabilities, but I don't think it ever really caught the public's attention in the way that BMW was hoping. And if we go all the way back to the original BMW M car, the M1, I know we look at that car now with kind of rose-tinted glasses, but at the time it was a total sales disaster. So in the late 2010s, when BMW decided that they were going to come out with a new halo flagship car, this time it would be different. They weren't going to produce a supercar that would, at best, maybe sell a few thousand units a year. Instead, they were going to dive headfirst into the red-hot, ultra high-performance SUV segment. And this made a lot of sense for BMW. For one, they already were selling high-performance SUVs in the form of the X3M and the X5M. And while these models have been very successful for BMW, there's basically been a new segment created above these cars with ultra high performance SUVs in the form of the Lamborghini Urus, the Bentley Bentayga, and the Aston Martin DBX. But maybe where BMW got the most inspiration for the XM was with the Mercedes-AMG G63. And we all know that the G-Wagon has far outgrown its military truck roots, and the G63 is now the ultimate status symbol. And let's talk a little bit about what makes the G-Wagon so unique. I would say first and foremost is the styling. It features this brutalist utilitarian look that is unmistakable for anything else on the road. And specific to the G63, it features a super powerful twin turbocharged V8 that's not really unique to the G-Wagon and is instead shared with about a half dozen other AMG models. So considering the success of the G63, BMW's success in already selling high-performance SUVs, and the overall increased interest in this segment, it was a clear decision where BMW would focus for their new halo car. Now, let's take a little bit of a closer look at what the BMW XM offers. And we're going to start with its size as a large SUV. It's roughly the same size as BMW's existing X7 model, the Mercedes-Benz GLS, or like a full-size Range Rover. The XM is very well appointed, basically featuring every possible creature comfort that BMW has available. And it's also very powerful, featuring a twin turbocharged V8 hybrid powertrain that, depending on the trim, makes anywhere from around 640 to 740 horsepower. And it's been reported that BMW's plans for the XM was eventually to come out with a full electric version to try and signal the direction that the company wants to head in. And briefly, just to touch on the styling, we will talk about it in depth more later, but it is undeniable that BMW took some very big swings. So up until this point, everything is kind of making sense. BMW has identified a popular segment that they're already successful in selling models in, and now they're coming out with a new model that is somewhat similar to their existing offerings, but with maybe just like a little bit more chutzpah. So why all the hate? Well, let's start with performance. Realistically, nobody is taking the XM to a racetrack, so lap times really don't matter here. Instead, the metric that I think is probably most important to potential customers of this car is the 0 to 60 time. And as we dive into these metrics, I'm just going to consider the normal XM model here and exclude the label red just for continuity's sake. So the base model XM has an advertised 0 to 60 time from BMW of 4.1 seconds. And while yes, that is certainly fast, it really isn't all that impressive for this segment. In fact, BMW advertises the X5M as having a 0 to 60 time of 3.7 seconds, which is kind of insane. The car that is significantly cheaper and is kind of meant to be the XM's little brother is being advertised by BMW as being the quicker car. And that gets us to our next issue, in that the X5M and the XM basically feature the exact same powertrain. Now, powertrain sharing is nothing new. With the price of R&D, manufacturing, and emissions compliance, this has pretty much become the norm. In fact, a lot of the XM's competition uses engines that are shared across a variety of models. I mean, just take, for example, the Audi RSQ8 and the Lamborghini Urus. Those models are extremely similar. But in most of these situations, the manufacturers are making sure that the more expensive, higher-end model is still getting more power and is actually faster. But that is not the case with the XM. And I think looking back now, we can say that BMW certainly should have given the XM more power and made sure it's faster than the cheaper model that is already in their lineup that it is the most similar to. And that kind of leads us into the next big issue with the XM, which is price. And it is a very expensive car. The XM starts at just under $170,000, which does put it at a little bit of an awkward place in the market. The X5M that we've been discussing is significantly cheaper, with a starting price of around $125,000. The Mercedes-AMG GLS63 starts around $143,000, which is really the model that the XM most directly competes against in Mercedes' lineup, and not the G-Wagon. But even just to touch on the G63, admittedly it is a bit more expensive, with a starting price of around $183,000. And this is where I think it is important to make a distinction in the high-performance SUV market. And I think we can kind of create two different groups here. The first are high-performance versions of existing models. So I'm talking about vehicles like that X5M we've been talking about, the RSQ8, or even the Cadillac Escalade V. These models typically range in price from roughly $130,000 to about $150,000. And then the other group are standalone high-performance exotic models. So the Lamborghini Urus, the Aston Martin DBX, and maybe the Bentley Bentayga. And these models are significantly more expensive, ranging in price from around $200,000, ranging up all the way into the mid $300,000 range. And to circle back around to the G-Wagon, even though it is offered in kind of some lesser trims, I think that its styling and its brand recognition help place it into that second group of high-performance SUVs, which I think is what BMW was hoping would happen with the XM. But instead of comparing it against all of these exotic cars, it is instead compared against kind of the higher-end trims of some of these lesser models that come in at a much lower price point. And I've mentioned a few times now, the G-Wagon kind of having this iconic styling, which is what BMW was trying to accomplish with the XM. So we're gonna address the elephant in the room next and talk about how the BMW XM looks. I, like many other people, am not a big fan of BMW's current design language. I would say that the controversy surrounding BMW's design really started with the latest generation of M3. And while I have kind of warmed up to that model more so recently, it seems like every new redesign that BMW comes out with is just more and more heinous. And for the XM, it is taking this design language kind of to its logical conclusion. BMW doubled down and launched this car that is now being called ugly by basically the entire population of YouTube commenters. It is hard to understate just how much people hate how this car looks. Now, with that said, I do think that styling is subjective and that people generally do warm up to new designs over time, but the XM is just a very hard sell. So where exactly does that leave us? Well, we have an ugly, expensive, slow car that is meant to be the new flagship halo car, but is outperformed by an existing model in this automaker's lineup that costs nearly $40,000 less. It leaves us with a car that is pretty much universally hated everywhere on the internet, and dealerships are now offering massive incentives to try and move inventory. And now it's being reported that BMW is going to discontinue the XM early, and that we'll never get that full electric version of the XM that BMW was planning on producing. Overall, we can consider the BMW XM to be the biggest performance car flop of the 2020s so far. Now, with all of that being said, I do not think that history will look back on the XM as unfavorably as we are right now. Often when manufacturers take big swings on styling and it ends up being a total flop, these are the models that are the most collectible and the most sought after in the future. When we look back in 20 years and basically all new cars are electric, the performance BMW SUV that people are going to be most interested in is going to be the low volume, crazy looking XM that still features a twin turbocharged V8 powertrain. People aren't going to care that it's slightly slower than the X5M because in 20 years, everybody is going to be driving an EV that has 1,000 horsepower and does 0 to 60 in 2 seconds flat. So with all that being said, I am going to stake my flag in the ground right now and make a prediction. As much rightfully deserved hate as the XM is receiving right now, I truly believe that way later down the line, the XM is going to be one of the most collectible BMW models.